On today's episode of PolicyWise.
You can climatize your coffee, your groceries, or even your gas, making every transaction an investment in climate action.
That's really your focus, is decarbonization of our energy industry.
Our best option can't be to just make cardboard signs.
You know, those individual decisions that maybe don't move the needle on a macro scale, but might save a turtle.
90% of Americans were blocked from investing directly into clean energy infrastructure projects.
How maybe you work with Climatize has been starting to democratize the environmental movement.
Capital is the ultimate enabling commodity for the energy transition. It allows people to go out and deploy the tools that we already have to solve this problem.
The scale at which we need to be implementing these projects is massive, like government level massive.
One turtle at a time, right?
But more on that later. Hello, PolicyWise people. We are back again today with another very exciting episode. I'm Ellie. I'm co-hosting with Michael today, who, you know what? He might just be my favorite co-host. Sorry, wow. Demi. She's listening here on this call. She just came off no video. If you give me a reaction to that. Sorry, Demi. We're here with a very exciting episode, something that's in my wheelhouse of environmental stuff, and we are joined today by our wonderful guest, Will Wiseman, who I will pass it to right now to give a little intro about himself.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. Really excited to be here with you all. So my name's Will Wiseman, CEO and co-founder of Climatize. We are an app empowering anyone to start investing in climate projects with as little as 1 penny. And with the app, anyone can become a sustainable investor in minutes. Really excited to be here with you all and talk about kind of both policy and the intersection with energy. I think that it's really top of mind with things going on around the world and also here with your audience.
Thanks, Will. It's so nice to have you on the podcast. So you brought up Climatize. Do you think you could get into it a little bit more about like what it is exactly and how it works, and I guess what your goal with it is?
At a really high level, the vision with Climatize is building a global financial network for climate action. The kind of story of what brought us to building this company is that my co-founder, she and I met while doing a double master's degree in renewable energy engineering. We joined the global climate strikes in Barcelona. And we saw 100,000 people in the streets. And it was like nothing I had ever seen before. That level of activism was incredibly inspiring. And we were filled with this hope and this motivation, and yet we're also hit by this deep sadness. Because we realized that we were all going to go home the next day and nothing was going to be different. And so we realized like our best option can't be to just make cardboard signs. If we can get 100,000 people together, there has to be a way to actually like transform and convert that energy and that motivation into tangible climate action. And so we really started pursuing this idea. What is it that everybody can contribute? And so we kind of came up with this idea of, if everybody pitched in their spare change, then collectively that could mean, it would be a lot of money. And it would also make it so that we kind of moved the public from being neutral bystanders in the climate fight to really being active stakeholders in the overall, development and deployment of clean energy. So really with Climatize, you can make a one-time investment, say $5 or $500. You can also link Climatize with your credit card so that every time you make a purchase, the spare change from those purchases is being automatically invested into the project of your choice. You can climatize your coffee, your groceries, or even your gas, making every transaction an investment in climate action. And really, as the cherry on top, we have a network of hand-picked sustainable brands which offer discounts and incentives for joining the Climatize network. So, by buying in and helping fight climate change, you're also getting all of these discounts at these really high-quality brands. And really here, what excites me the most about using crowdfunding is that it really opens up this asset class to everyone. Before Climatize, 90% of Americans were blocked from investing directly into clean energy infrastructure projects. Only accredited investors, meaning people with over a net worth of $1 million or an annual income of over $200,000, could invest directly into these projects. And now what crowdfunding does is it opens up opportunities which have been previously, accessible only to wealthy individuals and offers them now to everybody. And that's provided that there's appropriate safeguards in place. But, what we're doing is empowering the public to actually fund and deploy clean energy and really kind of act upon their moral desires.
I just really love the verb of climatize. The way you use that in there to climatize your purchases. I love that.
Climatize your gas, even. I love that. That was so funny.
Yeah. It seems like a really cool idea, and it's something that, I don't think most people would be able to come up with on the spot. And so it must have taken, some time to think through it, and really, as you sit with the problem and try to analyze solutions to the problem, getting to this sort of solution. Can you walk us through some of your experience? Will, we met in college a few years
Mhm.
ago. We're not that old yet, so it's just a few years ago. And it's crazy how years develop in this way. Can you kind of walk us through how you got here? How did you start in the environmental field? What's your background, and how'd you get to this point?
Sure, yeah. So, other than a brief internship in a particle physics lab, my entire career has been in climate tech. So, I've been working in climate tech since I was 17. Back then, I started out as a solar installer as a way to pay my way through college, and then, did mechanical engineering in San Diego State, which is where you and I met. And through that, also did some work in AI for renewable energy power forecasting, and then also in large scale electrical project management. And I think really what kind of began to inspire my transition into more of the finance space was after working on these large scale, solar projects and seeing that it can take 3 to 4 years to develop some of these projects from, a green field all the way to actual notice to proceed in operation. And what I felt like is that from an engineer's perspective, that, if my career is 40, 50 years, do I really want my entire impact to be maybe 15, 20 projects? And my sense of what I wanted to create in the world was bigger than that. And so I started kind of digging in deeper and deeper about what is really the root cause? What's the root problem here? And when I came to the reality that, a big problem is just the amount of capital that's moving into this space. We need to accelerate and create new streams of capital to flow in to fund these projects. Capital is the ultimate enabling commodity for the energy transition. It allows people to go out and deploy the tools that we already have to solve this problem. We just need to do it faster. And so that's where I realized that, after what I've done in terms of, studying renewable energy engineering, doing nuclear science, hydrogen, all of this stuff, I realized that, finance is something that you can rather be at the center of the equation. And, having this technical background, being able to speak to all of the different technologies and understand them at their core level enables me to now go with a better insight into how do we support and fund these projects.
I love it. I love it. So it sounds like Climatize prioritizes investing in these clean energy projects. So
Mhm,
that's really your focus is decarbonization of our energy industry. Can you give
mhm.
some examples of what some of those projects are and like where they're taking place? Is this like are you focusing in the US or abroad? I'm just curious what the scope of your projects are.
Yeah, so the first pilot project that we ran was a solar array in Kenya. We raised $2,720 in 7 days to be able to fund that, and that was just really, testing the concept idea. Just last week, we also found another 24 solar systems on low-income homes in Hollister. An area just kind of to the south of the Bay Area. These are going to be some of our pilot projects here in California. So really ramping up each one of these projects is only $8,300. That takes less than 500 people investing their spare change for a month. So these are how we're getting scale on these early days and really creating high impact projects that are not only beneficial to the environment, but also have a really great social impact. Additionally, we've signed a letter of intent with a company called Block Power. They're based out of New York. They do energy efficiency upgrades for low to middle income tenants. They go in, help, add more insulation. They help replace old boilers and heaters and replace them with heat pumps, which is a much more efficient technology in comparison to AC or traditional gas powered boilers. those tenants not only have the environmental benefits and the health benefits, but they actually save so much on their energy bill through these upgrades that they're able to repay the loan and still enjoy energy savings. So this is a way where, the companies that we're funding are going into these communities and creating high paying jobs and really helping support individuals at a really grassroots and kind of bottom up style, which is how we really view ourselves positioning as kind of crowdfunding has the opportunity to be very authentic and community focused. And that's where we're going in and saying, we've heard you. We've heard people say that they have distrust or, kind of a breakdown of trust with greenwashing and, ESG as a title has its flaws. And the reality is that with crowdfunding, you can see this project come to life before your eyes and, really see the final product. And that relationship and engagement and narrative of bringing these projects together is something that's really deeply meaningful.
Well, I'm kind of curious as you kind of outlay some of the impact that you've been able to have looking at projects and how they've been able to scale up.
Mhm.
Um, but then also, I can't help but think about individual decisions that get made to protect the environment. Folks choosing to maybe go with a paper straw instead of a plastic straw, or those individual decisions that maybe don't move the needle on a macro scale, but might save a
Mhm.
turtle. Might make a
Mhm.
smaller impact, one turtle at a time, right? I
Mhm.
don't know how that popped out of my brain, but anyway, Jarrett does a great job of making us sound great, so I feel comfortable. Anyway, so oftentimes engaging in individually environmentally conscious decisions is more expensive than not. And so I'm
Mhm.
curious how maybe your work with Climatize can or has been starting to democratize the environmental movement into groups that maybe have been not able to afford a more environmentally conscious car, or again, those individual decisions.
Mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah, and
that.
you raise a really
Okay.
great point. All of the individual decisions do add up. It's rather that unfortunately large industry, especially heavy machining, petrochemicals that underlie drug production, pharmaceuticals, the kind of macro energy system around electricity generation is just much more emissions than what you collectively create by switching to uh, paper straws. Now, the kind of where we see ourselves coming in is that oftentimes what people are making decisions on with sustainable brands, unfortunately, is the dollar amount in the store.
Hmm.
And people make that decision based on their pocketbook. And what we're coming in and saying is that, hey, we're giving you these discounts at these sustainable brands, making them actually cost competitive and helping you kind of become aware of really where the high quality products are so you can make that switch in your daily life, all while then further supporting these clean energy projects by investing.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the way that you put that. Very concise and succinct, and
Mhm.
absolutely hits the
Yeah.
point.
And also to your point, I want to touch on one thing too.
Yeah.
You brought up the fact that oftentimes, these projects, say putting solar on your roof, is not necessarily accessible to people who don't have a lot of extra money. The reality is there are lots of barriers for people in that kind of low to middle income community areas and especially urban also. If you don't own your home, you can't put solar on the roof. Same
Mm.
thing goes for EV charging. If you don't own your home, you likely can't make those electricity upgrades. If you live in an urban environment, there may not be EV charging infrastructure around you in the first place. So, what we're saying is okay, we recognize these barriers and address them head on by enabling you to invest in these projects with as little as a penny from your
Hmm.
purchases. Now you don't have to have that roof space. You can invest in these solar projects in and around your community and across the country, and instead invest in the underlying assets, which are ultimately the things creating the change. You don't have to have it on your roof to still make a difference.
Right, absolutely. And that kind of leads me to a follow-up question. Just thinking about maybe some of the businesses that you might be working with, thinking about, the way that they might think of their projects. And what I've maybe just seen just from my vision, and I don't, engage in these conversations as often as either of you might. And so this might be kind of a less informed perspective. But I've seen that a lot of the businesses, mostly small businesses that are trying to move the needle and bringing out more environmentally conscious products tend to be a lot smaller. and don't have as much
Mhm.
access to capital. And so what I'm hearing
Mhm.
is that, some of what your work does is crowdsource for their access to that sort of capital that's going to be able to move a project forward. Is that kind of accurate? And where else, if that's accurate, where else do you feel like resources need to be added in, or what do you think needs to change in order to make these projects a little bit more common, for lack of better
Mhm.
terms?
I mean, the capital component is a really important distinction. And unfortunately, there's still this stigma around needing to have returns or impact. And what
Mm,
we're realizing is that by coupling the two, it pays long term dividends, not only in the way that customers view you and your brand, but also the reality that you're minimizing your risk into the future. If you are susceptible, if you are a bank, for example, and you own a bunch of assets that are in a floodplain or, potentially areas that are, at risk of fire, you're exposed to these huge climate risks. What we're doing is helping mitigate that risk at an individual level. Now, to your point with the smaller companies, it is still challenging, and we need to have more venture capital moving into this space, but that goes hand in hand with government incentives. It goes
mm,
hand in hand with additional R&D investment from the government, and additionally there is more philanthropic capital that could be deployed into the space. Just recently, John Doerr, who's one of the famous venture capitalists from Kleiner Perkins, he just published a book, Speed and Scale. And within that,
mm.
he lays out how the government needs to, really lean into additional incentives for these programs, but also really begin to divest from all of the subsidies that we're providing to oil and gas companies.
Yeah.
The taxpayer dollars are going to these companies to keep gas prices artificially low. But all of a sudden you go to the gas pump, you look and it's now almost what, $6.50 a gallon around here in Santa Cruz. And yet we are looking at these oil and gas companies and they have not increased their production quotas at all. And they know that they're still earning a killing at the pump. So it
Hmm.
begs this question like, we're subsidizing these companies to keep prices artificially low, while that has us on a trajectory to this kind of non-sustainable, almost, I don't want to say apocalyptic, but very scary future if you look at the numbers.
Actually, just a few days ago, one of my professors, also, for the next 2 months or so, still my boss,
Mhm.
presented and testified to the Senate committee. I wish I remembered which
Mhm.
Senate committee, but a Senate committee. And I watched it online, and it was part of what came up in kind of their conversation was big oil, and how
Mhm.
big oil was raking in record profits in 2021. As gas prices go up, they're still bringing in record profits, citing other reasons as to why the numbers need to go up. But in 2022, now we're citing war as a reason why we see almost $6, past $6, for gas, but they're still on track to get record profits in quarter 1. Like, they are on track to
Mhm.
break the amount of which they've ever made before. Still citing
Mhm.
war costs and et cetera, et cetera. But laid off, I was reading numbers. It was like they laid off 60,000 employees, but were still able to bring in record to their shareholders. And it's very fascinating, because it's like, this isn't this isn't the way this was supposed to happen. Like, this isn't the way that people say that the free market is supposed to work. Economists know that, yeah, that was a theory, and now we know that
Mhm.
that theory is maybe not working. But
Mhm.
basically what we're seeing is that people are putting profit over people, putting profit over impact, and the impact that things are having on the environment and the economy, that they're not
Mhm.
separable. And I think that's kind of the point that you were trying to make, is that they're not separable. um
Yeah, exactly. And you raise this, gets into really the policy side, and that, the reality is that in America, we have Citizens United, which allows corporations to donate funds to political campaigns as if they're just any individual. But they
mm,
have an outsized voice in these, behind the scenes, closed door meetings. Oftentimes, a great book is Short Circuiting Policy by Dr. Leah Stokes from UCSB.
oh wow.
She, has all of these great stories of really oil lobbyists having their own desk in a legislator's office. And that money that gets deployed to lobby these companies makes a very, very big difference, because
Hmm.
really where it's actually the most effective, dollar per dollar, is at the state level. At the federal level, it's hard to kind of steer that large of a ship. But even when you have these federal mandates or incentive programs, like we've seen, Biden administration has been mildly successful with, creating some new financial incentives. It actually comes in at the state level to actually implement and deploy that. And
Mm,
so what happens is that if you have a breakdown at the state level, where yes, you may have a renewable energy mandate, but it's not actually being implemented by the regulators, or those regulators have actually been funded and elected by the companies that are, kind of counter to this policy, then even if you have this really great supporting legislation, it may not actually materialize in deploying clean energy or actually, cost savings for the consumer. And so that's what we call regulatory capture. And this
mhm.
often happens at like the Public Utility Commission level. When you have those kind of local, smaller scale elections, it doesn't take a lot of money to tip the scale there. Getting people out to vote for those smaller positions that are not, name ballot items, it doesn't require quite as much capital. And if you then front load the Public Utility Commission with people who are friendly to your agenda, they may not hold you to actually implementing that federal standard or that even state level standard.
Yeah.
I really love this conversation because it's getting at this whole thing where it's like I feel like what Climatize is doing and attempting to do is really give power to people who maybe are in situations where they don't feel like their government is adequately representing what they want to see when it comes to a clean energy transition. So I'm really excited about this whole idea where it's like, here's this accessible way that people can feel like they're making a difference and actually physically contributing to projects that are helping with this transition, particularly in situations where maybe the private sector or government spending um, isn't really putting that money there. But I'm curious, what how far can we take this style of fundraising or like project implementation? Like, I guess, how do you visualize Climatize in this style of fundraising to sort of mesh with government spending or private sector spending when it comes to clean energy development? Because um, obviously the scale at which we need to be implementing these projects is massive, like government level massive. So I'm really curious how you visualize Climatize in that style of fundraising, I guess, fitting into this overall scheme of what we need to be doing to complete this transition.
Mhm. Yeah, you raise a really good point. I mean, part of what my vision is with this, and I don't want to, make them out to be the bad guys. They do have a really important role in, shifting the overall macro energy system and macro economy. But what I see our role is slightly enabling the public to step around these traditional gatekeepers like governments and large financial institutions and really organize ourselves both financially and socially to act and deploy this clean energy as quickly as possible so that we have the tools to actually take control of our future. Now, as for dollars invested, the public retail investor market, the kind of our everyday person is actually an enormous pool of money. So I believe it was Forbes reported that the millennial generation, as of 2022, is inheriting $30 trillion worth of assets from the
Wow.
baby boomer generation. And that is a really fundamental transition of wealth between generations. And not only that, it's the different morals that these generations have. And it's not that I'm saying that one is bad or the other, but rather that transition of actual usable funds to generations that are more engaged on this topic enables us to really actively deploy that in a way that kind of fits more so with where we need to be providing ourselves with a sustainable future.
Totally. I love that explanation. That was great. I mean, I guess we've been talking a little bit about how Climatize enables the individual. I think your words were to sidestep, government in terms of funding some of these projects. But I'm curious how, I guess, government policy has allowed Climatize to be what it is. I know that in 2012, the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, or the Jobs Act, was passed and signed into law by Obama, and really kind of allowed greater access to crowdfunding, which is what Climatize relies on as a business model. So can you talk a little more to that about how the Jobs Act maybe enable you to to start Climatize or enabled Climatize to be what it is today?
Sure. Yeah. So the Jobs Act is a really, really pivotal key piece of legislation in really kind of creating the crowdfunding industry. The crowdfunding industry, I think, is deeply tied and associated to kind of the legacy platforms that came on. You think like your Kickstarter or your GoFundMe. They came on and it's deeply associated with those kind of product or campaign style raises. The reality is that crowdfunding is just opening up what used to be excluded to just the wealthy. Now, the Jobs Act was just amended in April of 2021, increasing the ceiling that you can raise to from $1 million up to $5 million. And that's really fundamentally key in doing this for clean energy. So in Europe, the ceiling that you could raise with crowdfunding was 5 million euros, and it's been that way for a long time. They have a thriving renewable energy crowdfunding ecosystem. There are 37 competitors investing about 5 billion euros through this framework of kind of citizen participation and investment. In the US, that ceiling down at $1 million made it really challenging to actually deploy meaningful clean energy just because of the capital expenses to build projects that, A, as a company owner, you can get sufficient margins on, but B, that actually represent economies of scale and that you can actually, diligence with, appropriate protections and all. So that's where we see now that this ceiling has been increased to $5 million. We can suddenly be a really first mover in helping transplant best practices from Europe over to the US and looking to recreate that ecosystem here. Now, one thing is that, in Europe, it's very fractured. They have 27 different countries, 27 different regulators, 23 different languages. And you can see how the complexity is exponentially compounding. In the US, we have a roughly homogeneous market with 330 million people, one regulator, the SEC, one currency, and really one primary language with Spanish as well in there as two. So all of a sudden, this is a much bigger market that's more kind of culturally comfortable with investing and really provides opportunities for us to, again, kind of sidestep that legacy bank or the government to really accelerate this transition. And I think not only is it in the money that we deploy that's really important, but it's also the social movement that goes hand in hand with it. It's that as you get people engaged with these projects, if we can get you in for one penny and begin making you feel more comfortable, to teach you about the industry, to really show you that these are safe and that they're creating impact in your community, we can start with these little tiny actions that begin to help us move the needle and make people feel more comfortable, that scale into larger actions down the line. So it's not purely valued in the currency that we're deploying, which is really, that's the business and that's how we stay alive. But there's the intangible component of actually creating a movement with which helps people, kind of collectively feel like they're part of something greater than themselves.
I love that. I'm so excited about the potential of Climatize given this Jobs Act update as of last year. You've spoken a bit about how I think Climatize, you were really incentivized to start this because of this kind of grassroots community level activism that you saw in Europe when you were studying there. And I think that this kind of community-based model of like we're all just individuals who want to make a change that are doing what we can to kind of push this clean energy transition forward. I'm curious if there's any parts of Climatize in terms of how it actually functions for the individual that promote this sort of communal type of just this type of environmental community or like grassroots community, and if there's any plans to kind of mesh this sort of crowdfunding model with some sort of social network model or something that helps expand what it means to be part of the environmental community, both as an activist, but also as someone who's investing what they can financially.
Yeah, it's a really great point, and it's something that we're actively really thinking about is, we're trying to make it so within your account, you have kind of a social score, a kind of who are you as an individual climate contributor, and try and make that something that people are proud of, that as you, invest into projects that you can then share that to social media to help bring people into the community. Additionally, like how can we make this competitive and fun? I think it's something that has been kind of lost in the conversation is that, this is an enormous opportunity. Aside from the crisis, it's an opportunity. And that if we look to make this a fun experience of like, how do we save the world together? There's a lot of opportunity for us to kind of tap into our more, kind of primal habits and make this something that brings you together as a community and, that we can be competitive about this. Like, wouldn't it be great in the world if we looked at it instead of, a crisis, but rather like, how can I make the most difference and actually be rewarded for that? Like a competitive style of impact is something we haven't really seen yet.
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating. Um, just thinking about how you can take this idea and almost like cultural I almost said culturatize, but just thinking about climatize as an action, but put it like mixing it in with culture, utilizing kind of what is already there, but kind of creating something new out of it. I can already see kind of I can already see it taking a local turn in case you all want to go down this
Mhm,
route, in which
mhm,
communities like you can have like let's say like a community park and say, hey y'all, if you want this park, here's one way in which you can pay for it, sidestepping the
mhm,
government or any private and maybe private investors into something like this, and say you can create your own project and have it crowdfunded and have it be environmentally
mhm,
conscious, and you have a large amount of
mhm,
people who would look at your project and donate. I can already see this as an easy way of getting things done within your local community that honestly high schoolers could even bite their teeth into,
mhm,
and think about how to change their community. As I'm
mhm.
kind of thinking about the Jobs Act and getting into my policy brain on things, I'm thinking about how, like, to the government, this is a rather minor change to go from,
Mhm.
1 million, or is it billion? It was 1
A
million,
million.
right?
So a
Okay,
million to
yeah.
5 million. Mhm,
Got it. Okay, 1 million to 5 million.
mhm,
Like that's a relatively easy quote unquote decision for the government to make. You're not
mhm,
asking for an increase in taxes on anybody. You're not, I can imagine that not even being that, partisan. And just being like, okay, it's just a kind of an administrative change, so to speak.
mhm,
What are
mhm.
some other policy ideas that are easy, quote unquote, that would make a large difference in how we are able to better navigate our care for the environment?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say some of the well, none of them are particularly easy, I think is the kind of unfortunate answer, but there's
Yeah.
ways to be very systematic about it. I
Mm,
think the first thing that we could do is require more transparency and, transparency as well as disclosure about risk and environmental impact. It's something that the SEC is currently working on, is forcing public companies to disclose their emissions and what like climate risk poses to their business plan.
mm,
This is something that we're flying completely blind on right now. There is no real risk disclosure about companies that have adverse potential risk to climate disasters, whether that be fire, sea level rise, or flooding. And so that in itself can help us guide our decision making about what companies are really contributing to the problem, what companies are making a difference, and at least if we're measuring and aware of something, anything that can be measured can be improved. And
mm,
so with that, we can begin to create these kind of incentive programs with which companies can actually look at their balance sheet and say, okay, these are the different subsidy programs we can begin to tap into. Here's how we fund this, and really look to make those step changes. So, you know, at the moment, a real challenge is just, pardon my kind of just brain fart there.
No, 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 no. Go. Like,
Yeah,
this is not an easy question for me to ask. So,
yeah, definitely. Let me think on this one. What's a really good one I can speak to? So, there are two ways that we can also look at like policy, some of them being very constructive and some of them potentially presenting risks that we
mm,
didn't necessarily think through entirely. So one example of that is that the US government is currently looking at it like applying heavy tariffs two solar production facilities out of Southeast Asia. They have tried to, kind of
Hmm.
shrink the product dumping from Chinese solar manufacturers into Southeast Asia, so Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, etc. Um, if those tariffs are applied, it's going to mean a really like a major spike in prices for solar panels here in the US, which could possibly
Hmm.
destabilize kind of the economic viability of the industry. And looking at that, that is one policy decision that may really slow down the deployment of solar in particular. And why
Hmm.
this really matters is that all of a sudden it completely halts the ability to finance these projects because you're suddenly looking at potential spike like cost increases within the supply chain that as an investor, if you're saying I'm investing in this project with these expected returns, but all of a sudden there's going to be a cost spike in the materials that you need to actually build those projects, then you have this regulatory risk that may completely derail the financial viability of those projects. And
Yeah.
so we've seen this real slowdown in deployment of solar recently while we wait on really what's going to be the outcome of that policy decision. So, it's important for us to be building the manufacturing capability here in the United States so that we have energy security and the ability to deploy and manufacture these projects here, like on American soil using American, labor and manufacturing. It
Hmm.
it is an important step for us to build up those capabilities. But at the same time, if we do that at the cost of completely stopping the industry, then you have to look at really what's the net benefit there. And are we really doing this in the most effective way possible? I think also something like to your point, where like I wouldn't call them easy victories, but we
Hmm.
do need to help like clear up some of the narrative, at least in the like federal conversation around energy jobs in the US. So there's often this conversation, and I saw, Joe Manchin really beat the table on this when kind of derailing the Build Back Better bill. He really
Hmm.
went to bat for saying we need to protect these coal jobs and make sure that they are appropriately considered in this transition. There are 40,000 coal jobs in the US. That's it. There are
It's pretty small.
230,000 solar jobs. And
Wow.
so we are really holding up this group as if it is like the be all end all. And it's an important consideration in the energy transition. But we shouldn't let that completely derail the conversation of how do we actually, build a more resilient American manufacturing industry? How do we transition people to new high paying jobs that are, ultimately benefiting the environment? But, when done thoughtfully, we can create job programs to really help these people transition in their careers. And personally, I really think that if you really cared about coal miners, you would get them out of coal mines. And it's like the worst thing for their health.
Right. No, literally at the end of the day. But that's never a popular thing for a politician to say to a bunch of coal miners,
It's not.
especially when they've
No.
been doing it for generations.
It's
Uh,
why the energy transition is such a challenging project because it is
yeah.
not only at the technical level, you have the economic considerations. Energy underpins the global economy and is deeply tied to kind of the geopolitical balance in the world. Look at countries that have outsized power because of their petro resources. Russia is a great example, Saudi Arabia, and even Venezuela. You have these kind of governmental regimes that have been able to stand on their own on the basis of oil. And
Hmm.
if we transition over to renewable energies, there is not a proper owner of the sun or the wind. And Europe in particular sees enormous advantages in making the energy transition to wane themselves off of Russian natural gas, but
Hmm.
also Europe on the whole is somewhat resource poor when it comes to fossil fuels. They have coal and some natural gas, but very limited oil. For them, it's completely advantageous for them to be building solar and wind resources that they have and are free so that they can then be energy secure on their own and not have this kind of price volatility. We've seen natural gas prices quadruple in Europe because of the conflict in Ukraine. that
Mm.
is going to really squeeze the consumer and potentially erode the appetite for this transition to clean energy if we don't get out ahead of this and recognize that, there's real opportunities for energy security, but also, kind of geopolitical stability.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's all interconnected. I think there's,
Hmm.
as we started that conversation, it mentioned the coal. That goes into reskilling, and so now you're gonna get higher
Hmm.
ed folks in the room talking about how do you reskill somebody and get them into a new job if we're gonna make this transition. Again, keeping that tie between the environment and the economy. It's very hard to
Hmm.
separate them, especially when it's so geopolitical, as you mentioned.
I think you hit on this when you brought up how tariffs can kind of really, even in just like one place, can really impact the ability to access and expand these renewable energy technologies that we need to spur this clean energy transition. And I kind of want to broaden up that conversation and
Hmm.
ask about how the government is investing in and kind of incentivizing or de-risking these technologies that we need. Obviously, this transition, as you brought up, it's like not just technology wise, but just cultural wise or socially, like a huge ask of people to transition away from the status quo that we have. And that applies also for our infrastructure, and we need to be implementing a bunch of new technologies not previously implemented on a big scale. So I wanted to kind of follow up and ask if you have some knowledge on what the government is currently doing to incentivize this or to de-risk these technologies, and maybe in doing so make it easier for a format such as Climatize, a crowdsourcing format, to also be able to take part in this transition and make it easier.
Fortunately, the government really is beginning to lean into looking at these early stage projects and how do they kind of get them over the valley of death, where, particularly with hardware, there's a long life cycle of R&D and then really, kind of early prototyping, lab work to get to a commercialization scale is a long and challenging path. Now, fortunately, there are new institutions coming in and really beginning to, help support this both financially and with mentoring as well. Climatize wouldn't be where it is today without the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency. We were grant recipients from NYSERDA, and that proved to be really catalytic capital, but as well as the network that they helped us create was pivotal in us like getting in the room with the right people to have these conversations about how do we, bring in public capital and alternative finance into helping you deploy these projects. Additionally, recently Jigger Shaw has taken over at the Department of Energy's loan programs office, which is really, it's a high bar to be able to get funding for these projects, but these are projects that could pull, I think their criteria is something like a gigaton of carbon is the bare minimum that you need to be able to pull, from the energy system to really be viable for one of these grants. But they're coming in and now deploying lots of money in particular into hydrogen. We've seen now a number of shots at fusion technologies. That's being, really increasing, especially in the venture capital space. The nuclear conversation is kind of increasing in relevancy again. And then additionally, there's SBIR grants, which are, kind of really tailored towards helping these hardware companies get off the ground because, they're more capitally intensive to prove out, the viability.
Well, I just want to say as you're kind of going through these, and I'm sitting here like Googling a bunch of things that you're saying because I'm new to this conversation, but also want to be able to keep up. Um,
Mhm.
and as we start to transition and closing out a little bit, first, you're inspiring not only to me, but I think to others who are probably listening to this, who's thinking about how to turn their passions into change and like how do you
Mhm.
actually go about that and go about pursuing a new idea and kind of um, entering a new field or even creating a new field. So, what
Mhm.
would you say to young people who are listening who want to make a difference in the world, related to saving our planet or otherwise? Maybe what do you wish you knew, or what would you like to tell a younger you, or someone who's listening in and passionate but doesn't know what to do?
Well, I think the first and easiest thing to say is that, you'll never be ready for this journey. Just dive in. It's something that, people wait for this moment to come along when they think they're going to be ready, and the only moment is now. we need all hands on deck to really start pushing this forward. And additionally, the energy transition has a need for skill sets in every aspect of the economy. So I think people often think that, being active in climate means you have to be an engineer. There are lots of jobs for designers, for marketing. How do we thoughtfully communicate this and educate people? There's space for those technical roles, software engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. But additionally, if you're in sales and you don't love your job, come do sales for a company that's saving the world. Like, don't waste time on just getting that paycheck. You can get that same paycheck and better at these companies. These companies are on the rise. And if you look at the amount of venture capital that's now flowing into these companies, there are huge opportunities. And to think that, if you don't love your job, that there's not another alternative. No, we need you. We need you in every single role. And that is what I would really love to communicate to people, is that, like, whether you're doing this by investing, whether you're doing this by investing your time and energy, whether you're doing this just by starting to educate yourself and get involved, like, we need you. We need everybody. And so I think that, this has oftentimes been framed as something that, we are outsiders to. No, come message me on LinkedIn. I will set you up. I will find a job that is ready for you. It is my side passion of getting people involved in this. And, there are all kinds of resources, job boards that have started really popping up. I would say Climate is a really great example of a company that has done really well recently. And, they have jobs for everyone to join Climate and begin becoming, a real fighter in this journey.
Beautiful advice. Beautiful advice. I always love when people say that, because it's so true. I mean, as daunting and complex as this problem is, the solution is equally as comprehensive, and there's so many different places to tap in the fight against climate change, both even like inside the clean energy transition and also in all the other components of fighting climate change. So I really love that you brought that up. I think there's a place for everyone within this movement. And yeah, as Michael said, you are impressively knowledgeable about this, and I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to hear your insight about these topics. I'm studying everything climate related in college and want to go into this field, but I don't think that the intersection of, I guess, like renewable energy financing is not really a niche that I'm familiar with. So this has been super exciting for me to get to hear from you speak about this, and I'm so excited to see how Climatize expands and grows and all the great work that you guys will do in the future. So thank you so much, Will, for spending your noontime this Thursday with us. I hope you get a lunch break after this. Thank you again so much. It was great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here with you both. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share. And, I'd please invite anybody to, sign up for Climatize, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am happy to help in any way. And, I think this is something we achieve together. So, grateful to be able to spread the mission and help inspire.
Thanks, Will. It's been a pleasure. This was PolicyWise, an intergenerational podcast by Youth Leadership Institute focused on bringing young people into the policy conversation.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at PolicyWisePod. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, please slide into our DMs or send us an email at policywise@yli.org.
And stay tuned for upcoming episodes.